Okay, everyone, we'll get started here in about 4 minutes or so.
I thought I understood it, and then I went back over.
Okay, everyone, we'll get started here in just a minute or two. Okay, everybody, just give me 1 minute or two, and then we'll get started. Okay, give me 1 second here. Let me go ahead here and start the video. Let me just pull this up real quick. Okay. So thanks everybody for for joining me today. And once again, not a big deal if you can't make it on during class time, as long as you watch the video. But just go ahead and send me an email if that's the case. Okay, so let's kind of talk a little bit about the readings here. And I apologize. the dogs in the background. But anyways, though, um, so for the assignment
Yes.
on Wednesday, next Wednesday, when you come to class, it's going to be a situation where you don't have to make it like on time necessarily, like 9:30, but you're going to have the whole day to do it. But I'm going to give you a topic which I've already written actually. So I'm going to give you a topic, and you're going to have 75 minutes to compose an essay. And the main thing that I'm looking for, though, is that you compose an essay and that you have a thesis and you have an argument. Remember that like our class is might be a little bit different than some of the classes that you might have in the future. I have to unfortunately tell you. But for our class, I'm not necessarily concerned about like what you think about the topic, but I want to understand like why your reasoning is for that topic. So, it doesn't matter if you're, Democrat, Republican, like whatever the issue might be. I'm more concerned about how you can support your opinion. So, whatever your argument is. So, I'm going to give you a topic. Like I said, I've already written it and so forth. So I just want to get your opinion. I mean, how well can you support your opinion or your argument about that? And I mean, these are just some of the main things. Try to have an opening grabber or hook, if you will. Introduce a clear thesis that you're talking about. Address the counter arguments. I know that it's only 75 minutes, so it might be difficult to do that, but I mean, like, what would other people say in counter to your arguments, right? And have a strong conclusion, of course, and pay attention, obviously, to spelling and grammar. I mean, to be honest, 75 minutes, I'm not going to be too nitpicky on that. I know that everybody kind of makes mistakes and so forth, so don't worry too much about that. Okay, so also though, I want to give you guys in advance to think about the next essay. And when I say next essay right here, like the second bullet point here, right here, start thinking about the next essay. Actually, when you think about it, this could also be your main topic for the final project, which you're going to have to do an annotated bibliography. Remember that I'm going to show you how to do that. I'm going to show you how to go to the library resources again and so forth. So at this point, though, just start thinking about what your next essay might be. And so, I mean, these are just some of the topics that I threw out there, but I know that like Helena, she's not in this class, she's in the last class, but she had a different topic. That's totally fine. I mean, the main thing that I want you guys to do for this paper or for this final project is I want you guys to start thinking about things that interest you personally. So, well, I love hearing papers about, Shakespeare and Hemingway and things like that. I also like to hear papers or read papers and grade papers on things like Lady Gaga or Clint Eastwood and just things like that. So don't be shy in this final paper or this final project, final paper and final project. I mean, let me know what you think, and if you have an idea that you're not really certain on, just let me know. Okay, so getting into the readings a little bit, this is interesting because the author of this article talks about 95% of newsrooms probably went to private institutions. So let me just ask you guys in the chat box here, do you think that the majority of news that you guys get on a day-to-day basis comes from people that worked in Harvard or Yale or they went to college at Harvard or Yale or Princeton or like what do you think? Exactly. Yeah. So Justin says that no, exactly. You're right. You're right. Um, one of the authors that I'm going to be talking about right now actually is Malcolm Gladwell, and he's actually done some studies on these very things. And what he says is that actually, if you look at the data, most people don't get their news from journalists who went to Harvard and Yale. In fact, what he says is that actually, if you look at the data, most people never even went to Harvard and Yale. And even if they did, their SAT scores or ACT scores tend to be less than like for example you guys at Seminole State or UCF. And I know, I mean, a good friend of mine at UCF also says the same thing, is that the SAT scores and the ACT scores don't really matter in terms of determining student success. It actually is the reverse because, and I'm going to show you that most people that get into those colleges actually do worse, um, like later on in life. But we'll kind of get to that here in a second. But also, this is another interesting thing that Malcolm Gladwell points out, and your authors point out in the essay. But let me just kind of ask you guys, do you think that right here, do you think that the more money you pay for an education means that you're going to be educated better? Just in the chat box, just like, what do you think? Okay, so Hunter, okay, so what I was saying is that, do you think that the more money you pay for education means that you're going to be educated better? Yeah. So Shaylin says no. Yeah, I tend to agree. And we're going to look at that specifically. Um, you know what? I have to tell you guys this, that I was planning to show this video on Monday, right before you guys do your timed essay. But with the other class, we kind of got to it a little bit earlier. So I'm going to show you a video with Malcolm Gladwell, and he kind of explains this. But well, actually, but that's preliminary because I want to talk more about his latest, or one of his latest books, next week. So not today, but but probably on Wednesday, definitely before you do your timed essay, because I think it's really, really important. Okay, so so the Little Seagull book talks about capitalization, and I will tell you that at least for my class, don't worry so much about capitalization, because I know that the rules change constantly from MLA to MLA, from one year to another, and so forth. But I mean, just do your best to capitalize. But for italics, for titles, it does matter. So just make sure that you are italicizing titles, whether we're talking about books, movies, TV shows. I will tell you that for some things like poems, you can put them in italics, but for the most part, it's always best to just, I mean, be safe than sorry, right? So just put any titles that you see in italics. And even as I type this, I will tell you that I have to plead guilty, because this format that I do these keynotes in, it doesn't let me do italics, unfortunately. So I mean, but in your writing though, make sure to use italics for any kind of titles. Also, make sure to have proper titles. I mean, if you're referring to somebody who's a doctor, make sure to put DR period. Um, Professor, like PROF period, and Miss or Ms. I do want to like emphasize this though, because I know that sometimes somebody is a Mrs., like she might be married, right? But the proper way to refer to them in an email, and we're going to get into cover letters and resumes, probably next week or the week after. But in any case, though, you want to refer to a woman as Ms., like MS, period. Not Miss, not MISS, not Mrs. Even if you know that she's married, okay, you always want to refer to a woman when you're addressing them as Ms., MS, period. Okay. So also, your textbook talks about numbers. The Little Seagull talks about numbers. Okay, so let me just say this. Remember that for our class, for my class, I don't really even care necessarily if you are doing like the numbers wrong necessarily. I mean, technically it does matter, but I will just tell you that for future classes, you have to understand that MLA kind of works in different terms, meaning that for MLA right now, it says that any numbers that end before the number 10 need to be spelled out. Okay. Anything after that has to be in numerical form. So you have to put the like, so if it's like 23, you have to put 2 3, right? It's going to maybe be different in a future year, but just for right now, just remember that numbers that are 10 and below. So if it's 9, for instance, you have to write out 9, and uh, and anything over 10, you have to actually put the number in. So it's a little bit different, but and again, it might change. I mean, like I told you guys before in an earlier class, that MLA likes to do these things just to kind of get you to buy the new book, or get the schools, the universities, to buy the new book, even if it's totally ridiculous. But anyways, that's kind of the latest rules. Okay, so before I go on, and I want to show you a couple of clips from Malcolm Gladwell, but does anybody have any questions in the comments? I mean, again, just let me know. So Hunter says, yeah, so Hunter, yeah. So double digits have to be numerical form. Once again, I don't care. I mean, for purposes of this class, I really don't care, but I'm just letting you know for your other classes, they might be sticklers on that. And by the way, too, I know that for some of you that are taking math classes, I know that they're really kind of sticklers in terms of how you use information and so forth. Unfortunately, I can't I can't help you with that, unfortunately. But so Hunter says, yeah. So Hunter, your question about the timed essay, I have it written, but don't worry. I mean, as long as you're paying attention to today's class and also Monday's class, and actually, well, today's class, you'll be fine. So don't worry about it too much. But okay, so let's get into Malcolm Gladwell a little bit. And I mentioned before, actually, you know what? I'm going to skip past some of this until Monday's class, but I do want to kind of tease you. Like I mentioned before, I was going to tease you guys. So let me just ask again, what month do you think that most people that are successful in life, or we're talking about sports or politics, what months are they born in, do you think? Again, no wrong answers. I mean, just say what you think. Okay, so Hunter says June. Cindy says March. Also, before I show this too, let me just point out though that there is a very specific psychological reason why this is true. And this is not necessarily a knock against people that are born in different parts of the year. Hey, listen, I'm from August, right? That's my birthday. So this is not necessarily a knock against people, but there's a very psychological reason. Also, before I show this clip too, let me just kind of ask you guys. There is this specific country where plane crashes happen a lot. Can anybody identify the country? I mean, just again, guess. Just guess. Which is the worst country in terms of flying planes? Oh, wow. Okay. So Justin, good guess. You're not quite right, but so but interesting though. but there is a very specific cultural reason why a certain country is bad at flying planes, and it has nothing to do with the people, great people, but just very very interesting cultural component. But also the thing that I want to point out though is that what you're going to hear here is Malcolm Gladwell talks about success and he talks about the Beatles. And everybody thinks that the Beatles were the greatest rock band of all time. And they certainly are. But everybody thinks that, oh, well, it just had something to do with the British cultural, you know, the the British invasion, but actually, if you look at the Beatles, they were extremely hard workers. And that's the reason for their success. It has nothing to do necessarily with 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 the America like propping them up. I mean, maybe that was part of it, but their success was entirely devoted to hard work, and that's the most important thing that I can kind of convey to you guys as students is that don't ever give up. I mean, always work hard, and you can definitely achieve success. So the other part of this though is that yeah, sometimes success does have to do with culture, and that's where you're going to see the like I'll just tell you, okay, South Korea is the worst country in terms of flying necessarily, but anyways though we'll see that right here.
Let's turn to marketing for a second, because one of the deemed greatest fiascos of modern time was the introduction of New Coke. Yeah. Now you see this entire fiasco also as
okay. Actually, let me skip past this. We're going to cover this on Monday, but let me just show you this. Okay.
Malcolm Gladwell is probably the best-selling nonfiction writer in America. He sold many millions of books based on very simple ideas. Blink. Should you trust your first impression? The Tipping Point. How does a fad become a sensation? His new book, which is my favorite, is called Outliers. In it, he explores what makes...
Give me 1 second here. Let me just put this on full screen here.
Malcolm Gladwell is probably the best-selling nonfiction writer in America. He sold many millions of books based on very simple ideas. Blink. Should you trust your first impression? The Tipping Point. How does a fad become a sensation? His new book, which is my favorite, is called Outliers. In it, he explores what makes a person successful. Why do some talented people flame out early while others go on to brilliant careers? His main point is this: success doesn't have much to do with talent. Instead, he says it's almost always a product of hard work and of the culture in which one lives. Malcolm Gladwell, thank you. Thank you for having me. One of my favorite examples is actually your first example, where you talk about hockey players. And the reason I think you talk about them is because what could be more meritocratic than sports? You just, it's not who your parents are. It's just a question of raw talent and hard work, it would seem. But what do you find?
Well, you find some lovely work by a series of psychologists. What you find is that an overwhelming majority of hockey players are born in the first 3 months of the year, elite hockey players. And the same is true, by the way, of soccer.
Okay, so how many people caught that? How many people got that right? The first 3 months of the year. So very, very interesting, right?
Malcolm Gladwell is one of my favorite examples. Is actually not who your parents
Players are born in the first 3 months of the year, elite hockey players. And the same is true, by the way, of soccer around the world. And the reason for that is that the system, the system under which age class hockey and age class soccer are organized has, has as a cutoff date January 1st. And so from the very beginning, when we pick young kids to pull them out and put them on all-star teams and give them special coaching and special encouragement, we're looking at groups of children who are all 9 years old, and we're saying those 3 are the best, let's pull them out. Well, who is the best at 9 years old? Well, it's children who are the eldest in their class, those born closest to the cutoff
So
date.
the ones who are 9 years, 10 months, 9 years, 11 months, and 9 years, 11 and a half months, who are tend to
Are
be
the best. When you're 9 years old, 11 months can be 4 inches in height. It can be 25 pounds. It can be the difference between being a klutz and someone who's incredibly coordinated. And so we think there that what we've done is identify people who have extraordinary individual talent. We actually haven't. We've created a system that confers a special benefit on children born in a certain part of the year, and that benefit persists. And those kids are the ones who end up 10 years later playing all-star, playing in the NHL, or playing professional football or soccer around the world.
Do you think this applies to, finance? That there were some kids who seemed at a young age a little bit more talented at math, and that they get a certain amount of attention by teachers and parents, and they're told they're smart, and then it's reinforced.
Yeah, this principle in psychology is called the Matthew effect, after the line in the Bible, he who has much more will be given, right? It's this idea that it's called cumulative advantage, which is small initial advantages mushroom over time. The best data we have is on reading. A very, very small difference in reading ability at a very young age quickly mushrooms into a large difference. Why? Because if you're a little bit better at reading at the age of 6, you'll read more, right? Because reading is easier, more pleasurable. And that little extra increment of reading that you do causes you to read even better than the person behind you. And the cycle reinforces itself until you have, by the time when kids are 6, the difference in the amount they read is like this. When they're 12, the same kids, the difference is this. It's because of this snowballing effect that happens with small initial advantages growing.
Tell the story of the Beatles with regard to practice.
The Beatles are a lovely example because we think that their story begins with
this is a prioritization plus outside.
more fresh-faced, practically teenagers who burst on the
A
scene.
bit overdue, but
And the truth, they spend the really critical periods. They spend 2 years in Hamburg, Germany.
Wait, can you guys hear me okay? Or-
I can look at that for you. I'll just have to ask detailers to see how busy they are and if they have to do a quick clean for you. Has the vehicle been here before?
Yeah.
Hey, can everybody hear me okay? Okay, let me go ahead here and mute everybody. Or actually, just say silent. I'll address your questions here after this. Okay.
Malcolm Gladwell is probably the best-selling nonfiction writer in America. He sold many millions of books based on very simple ideas. Blink. Should you trust your first impression? The Tipping Point. How does a fad become a sensation? His new book, which is my favorite, is called Outliers. In it, he explores what makes a person successful. And they would have said, no way, we're not going to do it. So something about that group made them relish the opportunity to do it. Malcolm Gladwell is
Hamburg, Germany, has the house band by the time when kids are 6, the difference in the amount they read is like this. When they're
So let me just back up for a second here, what Gladwell is saying is that a lot of kids, and I'm sure that I'll ask in the chat box as well, but you know, a lot of kids, a lot of you guys were working so hard at such a young age that it's kind of a mistake that we think of the Beatles as just being, you know, like a very very successful in terms of like they didn't work hard to get it. Actually, they worked very hard to get it. And I assume that the same thing is true with a lot of you as well. You work very hard to get to where you are. So there's nothing to be ashamed about that.
12, the same kids, the difference is this. It's because of this snowballing effect that happens with small initial advantages growing.
Tell the story of the Beatles with regard to practice.
The Beatles are a lovely example because we think that their story begins with the invasion of America in 1964, right? These four fresh-faced, practically teenagers who burst on the scene. You know, nothing could be further from the truth. They spend the really critical periods. They spend 2 years in Hamburg, Germany, as a house band in a strip club, playing 8-hour sets 7 days a week for months at a stretch. They have one of the most extraordinarily intensive apprenticeships in rock and roll. And if you think about what it takes to play, I mean, the typical set for a rock band is what, an hour and a half? They did 8-hour sets, day in, day out. If you think about that, you realize if you force a group of young musicians to play together over that in that way for months at a stretch, you're forcing them to master all kinds of different genres, to learn how to play together well, to write songs. I mean, everything you need to do, particularly at the dawn of rock and roll, to be the most dominant band of your generation, requires some kind of apprenticeship. And lo and behold, they have it. And I would argue, and many agree with me, that no Hamburg, no Beatles. You know, they're just not the band that we remember unless they had that kind of intensive training.
But of course, it raises an interesting question to me, which is, you could imagine a lot of other bands being told, I've got good news for you. You've got a great gig in Hamburg, Germany. The bad news is you're going to have to play 8 hours a day, 7 days a week. And they would have said, no way, we're not going to do it. So something about that group made them relish the opportunity to do enormous amounts of practice. And presumably that's true of some of these sportsmen and true of other people. That is, yes, it takes practice, but you need a certain mentality to want to practice, the hell out of it. You know,
what you have described is what I believe talent is. Talent is the desire to practice, right? It is that you love something or so much that you're willing to make an enormous sacrifice and an enormous commitment to that, whatever it is, task, game, sport, what have you. When people use that word, we usually talk about something inherent in you, right? And we think of something very specific. I don't think that's what talent is. I think talent is simply desire. It's what you said of the Beatles. Their talent consisted of their ability to see Hamburg as an opportunity, whereas 99 out of 100 bands would have seen Hamburg as a nightmare, which, by the way, it was. I mean, you could argue that the Beatles' talent was also an act of delusion. You know, to be able to see opportunity in Hamburg in 1959, you know, required at the very least, an extraordinary imagination.
And we will be back with Malcolm Gladwell.
Okay, so let me just kind of ask you guys, do you agree with that? I mean, do you think that a lot of times we think about people in our society that they're talented, but really, when you think about it, is it about hard work or is it actually talent? I mean, what do you guys think about hard work? I mean, just in your jobs or your school, do you think that it's mostly about hard work, or do you think that it's about talent? So maybe a little bit of both, right? So one of the things I wanted to do here today, we might not, okay, well, actually that's not correct. But one of the things that I wanted to do today is maybe look at like a paper from the past semester, and but we'll probably save that for Wednesday, or I'm sorry, for Monday of next week. So I just want to kind of show you guys though for Wednesday, or for Monday, I'm sorry. For next week, we'll take a look at a paper. But in the meantime, though, one of the things I do want to do is once again remind you of the syllabus. So we have these pages to look after. And remember that the next assignment is going to be this one, November 8th. Actually, that might be, I might have to adjust that, but basically it's going to be like, next Wednesday. And I was originally set that up to be maybe that Sunday night, but it's actually going to be Wednesday. So I'm going to readjust that. And remember, I have the topic picked already. But just one of the things I wanted to do here, and by the way, okay, so you see this is actually my own documents for my own classes, or for my own conference that's coming up. But so don't worry about that. But one of the things I wanted to do here is I want to show you Malcolm Gladwell and this latest document. So bear with me. I was going to do this for next week, but I think that we finished class a little bit early today. So I want to show you guys this, and we'll also go over more of Malcolm Gladwell's concepts here next week. But I do want to point out though that what he says here, now it doesn't matter if you're religious. I mean, I think that, David and Goliath is in the Old Testament. So it doesn't even matter if you're Christian or Jewish or even in Muslim. In the Quran, I think they talk about this. So it has nothing to do with religion. But what his point is that when you look at modern society, the story of David and Goliath is so relevant. I mean, just look at me. I mean, we'll talk more about this in a future class, but I mean, like, listen, I'm a huge Tom Brady fan. Tom Brady was from the lowest of the lowest, right? He's from Michigan. That's where I'm from. And Tom Brady now is the best quarterback of all time. Michael Jordan, who I don't think I pulled it up on, but I'll show you guys next time. But Michael Jordan failed to register for his varsity basketball program. Albert Einstein failed math, okay? And one of the great quotes, in fact, let me just go ahead here and pull it up here. Okay, so let me pull it up here. And I want everybody to listen to this quote and watch this quote, actually. So take a look at this. This is Michael Jordan. And take a look at this. I've missed more than 9,000 shots in my career. I've lost almost 300 games. 26 times I've been trusted to take the game-winning shot and missed. I've failed over and over again in my life, and that is why I succeed. So what do you think that quote means to you guys? I mean, like, anybody in the chat box here that wants to weigh in? Yes, exactly. Great comments. So let me just go ahead here and show you guys. And this, I know that we're kind of getting low on time here, but let me just show you guys this, and then I want to answer any questions. But this is Malcolm Gladwell, and we'll talk more about this on Monday's class. But one of the things that he says is that you can't just judge a student or a person in general just based on an ACT score or SAT score. It turns out that a lot of times, like Michael Jordan, he did not even make his varsity basketball team, and he's the best basketball player of all time. I think that he and Tiger are probably, 1 and 2 in terms of like the best athletes of all time. But I mean, Michael Jordan didn't even make his basketball team. Albert Einstein didn't pass math. So let me just show you this, and then we'll wrap up for the day. I know this is a little bit of a lengthy video, but I think that this is so true, and we're going to continue with this on Monday.
So I wanted to tell a story that that really obsessed me when I was writing my new book. And it's a story of something that happened 3,000 years ago when the kingdom of Israel was in its infancy. And it takes place in an area called the Shephelah in what is now Israel. And the reason the story obsessed me is that I thought I understood it. And then I went back over it and I realized that I didn't understand it at all.
So before going further, I just want to say that this is kind of a metaphor for life. So cool story.
Ancient Palestine had along its eastern border, there's a mountain range, still same is true of Israel today. And in the mountain range are all of the ancient cities of that region. So Jerusalem, Bethlehem, Hebron. And then there's a coastal plain right along the Mediterranean where Tel Aviv is now. And connecting the mountain range with the coastal plain is an area called the Shephelah, which is a series of valleys and ridges that run east to west. And you can follow the Shephelah, go through the Shephelah to get from the coastal plain to the mountains. And the Shephelah, if you've been to Israel, you'll know it's just about the most beautiful part of Israel. It's gorgeous with forests of oak and wheat fields and vineyards. But more importantly, though, in the history of that region, it's had a real strategic function. And that is, it is the means by which hostile armies on the coastal plain find their way, get up into the mountains and threaten those living in the mountains. And 3,000 years ago, that's exactly what happens. The Philistines, who are the biggest of enemies of the kingdom of Israel, are living in the coastal plain. They're originally from Crete. They're a seafaring people. And they may start to make their way through one of the valleys of the Shephelah up into the mountains, because what they want to do is occupy the highland area right by Bethlehem and split the kingdom of Israel in two. And the kingdom of Israel, which is headed by King Saul, obviously catches wind of this, and Saul brings his army down from the mountains, and he confronts the Philistines in the valley of Elah, one of the most beautiful of the valleys of the Shephelah. And the Israelites dig in along the northern ridge, and the Philistines dig in along the southern ridge, and the two armies just sit there for weeks and stare at each other because they're deadlocked. Neither can attack the other, because to attack the other side, you've got to come down the mountain into the valley and then up the other side, and you're completely exposed. So finally, to break the deadlock, the Philistines send their mightiest warrior down into the valley floor, and he calls out and he says to the Israelites, "Send your mightiest warrior down, and we'll have this out, just the two of us." This was a tradition in ancient warfare called single combat. It was a way of settling disputes without incurring the bloodshed of a major battle. And the Philistine who's sent down, their mighty warrior, is a giant. He's 6'9". He's outfitted head to toe in this glittering bronze armor. And he's got a sword, and he's got a javelin, and he's got a spear. He is absolutely terrifying. And he's so terrifying that none of the Israelite soldiers want to fight him. It's a death wish, right? There's no way they think they can take him. And finally, the only person who will come forward is this young shepherd boy. And he goes up to Saul and he says, "I'll fight him." And Saul says, "You can't fight him. That's ridiculous. You're this kid. This is this mighty warrior." But the shepherd is adamant. He says, no, you don't understand. I have been defending my flock against lions and wolves for years. I think I can do it. And Saul has no choice. No one else has come forward. So he says, "All right." And then he turns to the kid. He says, "But you've got to wear this armor. You can't go as you are." So he tries to give the shepherd his armor, and the shepherd says, "No." He says, I can't wear this stuff. The biblical verse is, I cannot wear this, for I have not proved it. Meaning, I've never worn armor before. You got to be crazy. So he reaches down instead on the ground and picks up 5 stones and puts them in his shepherd's bag and starts to walk down the mountainside to meet the giant. And the giant sees this figure approaching and calls out, "Come to me so I can feed your flesh to the birds of the heavens and the beasts of the field," right? He issues this kind of taunt towards this person coming to fight him. And the shepherd draws closer and closer, and the giant sees that he's carrying a staff. That's all he's carrying, right? Instead of a weapon, just this shepherd's staff. And he says, he's insulted. "Am I a dog that you would come to me with sticks?" Right? And the shepherd boy takes one of his stones out of his pocket, puts it in his sling, and whirls it around and lets it fly. And it hits the giant right between the eyes, like right here in his most vulnerable spot. And he falls down either dead or unconscious. And the shepherd boy runs up and takes his sword and cuts off his head. And the Philistines see this and they turn and they just run. And of course, the name of the giant is Goliath, and the name of the shepherd boy is David. And the reason that story has obsessed me over the course of writing my book is that everything I thought I knew about that story turned out to be wrong. So David in that story is supposed to be the underdog, right? In fact, that term, David and Goliath, has entered our language as a metaphor for improbable victories by some weak party over someone far stronger. Now, why do we call David an underdog? Well, we call him an underdog because he's a kid, little kid, and Goliath is this big, strong giant. We also call him an underdog because Goliath is an experienced warrior and David is just a shepherd, right? But most importantly, we call him an underdog because all he has is that Goliath is outfitted with all of this modern weaponry, right? This glittering coat of armor and
and a sword and a javelin and a spear, and all David has is this sling. Well, let's start there with the phrase, all David has is this sling, because that's the first mistake that we make. In ancient warfare, there are three kinds of warriors. There's cavalry, men on horseback and with chariots. There is heavy infantry, which are foot soldiers, armed foot soldiers with swords and shields and some kind of armor. And there's artillery. And artillery are archers, but more importantly, slingers. And a slinger is someone who has a leather pouch with two long cords attached to it. And they put a projectile, either a rock or a lead ball, inside the pouch. And they whirl it around like this. And they let one of the cords go. And the effect is to send the projectile forward towards its target. That's what David has. And it's important to understand that that sling is not a slingshot. It's not this, right? It's not a child's toy. It's in fact an incredibly devastating weapon. When David rolls it around like this, he's turning the sling around probably at 6 or 7 revolutions per second. And that means that when the rock is released, it's going forward really fast, probably 35 meters per second. That's substantially faster than baseball thrown by even the finest of baseball pitchers. More than that, the stones in the Valley of Elah were not normal rocks. They were barium sulfate, which are rocks twice the density of normal stones. If you do the calculations on the stopping power of the rock fired from David's sling, it's roughly equal to the stopping power of a 45 millimeter handgun, right? This is an incredibly devastating weapon. Accuracy, we know from historical records that slingers experienced slingers could hit and maim or serious or even kill a target at distances of up to 200 yards. From medieval tapestries, we know that slingers were capable of hitting birds in flight. They're incredibly accurate. Right? When David lines up, and he's not 200 yards away from Goliath, he's quite close to Goliath. When he lines up and fires that thing at Goliath, he has every intention and every expectation of being able to hit Goliath at his most vulnerable spot between his eyes. If you go back over the history of ancient warfare, you will find time and time again that slingers were the decisive factor against infantry in one kind of battle, against heavy infantry in one kind of battle or another. So what's Goliath? He's heavy infantry. And his expectation when he challenges the Israelites to a duel is that he's going to be fighting another heavy infantryman, right? When he says, come to me that I might feed your flesh to the birds of the heavens and the beasts of the field, the key phrase is come to me. Come up to me because we're going to fight hand to hand like this. Saul has the same expectation. David says, I want to fight Goliath, and Saul tries to give him his armor because Saul is thinking, oh, when you say fight Goliath, you mean fight him in hand-to-hand combat, infantry on infantry. But David has absolutely no expectation. No, he's not going to fight him that way. Why would he? He's a shepherd. He's spent his entire career using a sling to defend his flock against lions and wolves. That's where his strength lies. So here he is, this shepherd, experienced in the use of a devastating weapon, up against this lumbering giant, weighed down by 100 pounds of armor and these incredibly heavy weapons that are useful only in short-range combat. Goliath is a sitting duck. He doesn't have a chance, right? So why do we keep calling David an underdog? And why do we keep referring to his victory as improbable? It's the second piece of this that's important. It's not just that we misunderstand David and his choice of weaponry. It's also that we profoundly misunderstand Goliath. Goliath is not what he seems to be. There's all kinds of hints of this in the biblical text. Things that are, in retrospect, are quite puzzling and don't square with his image as this mighty warrior. So to begin with, the Bible says that Goliath is led onto the valley floor by an attendant. Now that is weird, right? Here is this mighty warrior challenging the Israelites to one-on-one combat. Why is he being led by the hand by some, young boy, presumably, to the point of combat? Secondly, the Bible story makes special note of how slowly Goliath moves. Another odd thing to say when you're describing the mightiest warrior known to man at that point, right? And then there's this whole weird thing about how long it takes Goliath to react to the sight of David. So David's coming down the mountain, and he's clearly not preparing for hand-to-hand combat, right? There's nothing about him that says, I'm about to fight you like this. He's not even carrying a sword. Why does Goliath not react to that? It's as if he's oblivious to what's going on that day. And then there's that strange comment he makes to David. Am I a dog that you should come to me with sticks, right? Sticks? David only has one stick. Well, it turns out that there's been a great deal of speculation within the medical community over the years about whether there's something fundamentally wrong with Goliath, an attempt to make sense of all of those apparent anomalies. There have been many articles written. The first one was in 1960 in the Indiana Medical Journal. And it started a chain of speculation that starts with an explanation for Goliath's height. So Goliath is head and shoulders above all of his peers in that era. And usually when someone is that far out of the norm, there's an explanation for it. So the most common form of giantism is a condition called acromegaly. And acromegaly is caused by a benign tumor on your pituitary gland that causes an overproduction of human growth hormone. And throughout history, many of the most famous giants have all had acromegaly. So the tallest person of all time was a guy named Robert Wadlow, who was still growing when he died at the age of 24, and he was 8'11". He had acromegaly. Do you remember the wrestler Andre the Giant, famous? He had acromegaly. There's even speculation that Abraham Lincoln had acromegaly. Anyone who's unusually tall, that's the first explanation we come up with. And acromegaly has a very distinct set of side effects associated with it, principally having to do with vision. The pituitary tumor, as it grows, often starts to compress the visual nerves in your brain, with the result that people with acromegaly have either double vision or they are profoundly nearsighted. So when people have started to speculate about what might have been wrong with Goliath, they said, wait a minute, he looks and sounds an awful lot like someone who has acromegaly. And that would also explain so much of what was strange about his behavior that day, right? Why does he move so slowly and have to be escorted down into the valley floor by an attendant? Because he can't make his way on his own, right? Why is he so strangely oblivious to David that he doesn't understand that David's not going to fight him until the very last moment? Because he can't see him, right? When he says, come to me that I might feed your flesh to the birds of the heavens and the beasts of the field, the phrase come to me is a hint also of his vulnerability. Come to me because I can't see you, right? And then there's, am I a dog that you should come to me with sticks? He sees two sticks when David has only one. So the Israelites up on the mountain ridge looking down on him thought he was this extraordinarily powerful foe. What they didn't understand was that the very thing that was the source of his apparent strength was also the source of his greatest weakness. And there is, I think, in that a very important lesson for all of us. Giants are not as strong and powerful as they seem. And sometimes the shepherd boy has a sling in his pocket.
So kind of a cool little lesson there. I know that we're kind of wrapping up on time, but are there any thoughts or any comments on that video before I go on? And again, we'll cover Malcolm in the next class as well, but just a couple other things here, and then we'll wrap up for today. And then also too, on Monday, I do want to. I know that you guys are going to be seeing the first paper instructions, so we'll go over that on Monday, and I'm going to show you an example of a previous paper. So we'll do that on Monday. And unfortunately, I'll just tell you this, that I just learned this morning, or actually last night, that we won't be able to do, the like like a hybrid class where we could go to the NZN and so forth. Unfortunately, I found out last night that there it's just not going to happen. Unfortunately, I wish we could, but because it would be great to see you guys in person, but I don't think it's going to happen. And unfortunately, I don't think that we're going to be having classes in class next semester, just because of this situation and face to face. And I mean, just out of curiosity, though, what do you guys think about that? I mean, would you guys prefer to have like in class? I mean, it's not going to happen, unfortunately, but okay. So Sydney says in class. Yeah, I kind of agree. Yeah, not with COVID still being around. Yeah, I definitely hear you, Justin. I mean, it's really weird because here's the thing. It's like people, I assume, like you and me, we're probably like asymptomatic. Like, in other words, we don't have any symptoms necessarily. But even if we don't have any symptoms, we can still kind of spread that to our elders, and that's like one of the things that I'm worried about, because it's like my mom, you know, she's totally asymptomatic. I mean, no diseases at all. I mean, like no symptoms at all. And me, no symptoms at all. But it's like if I get the disease and I could go to my mom's place in Cocoa Beach and it could spread. So you never know what's going to happen. But the good thing is that with our classes, I think that Zoom is doing a pretty good job. I mean, I think that they have to do a little bit better in terms of compared to GoToMeeting, which I think was really good. And I think that Zoom though is doing a good job, and we're all making our sacrifices. And like I said, I have a good friend from UCF, and they're doing the same thing. I mean, he said that they're at like 20% of capacity right now, so they're doing just the best they can. And you know, I love UCF, so I'm sure they're doing the best that they can. So, but just before we wrap up here, we only have about 9 more minutes or so. But we will wrap up with this, and I definitely want to cover more of Malcolm Gladwell on Monday's class. And I think that you guys will be in perfect shape for the, I guess, the Wednesday, the timed essay. I mean, don't worry about it. I mean, just don't worry about it. I mean, you'll be fine. The only thing that I ask is that you have a clear thesis, you have a clear argument, and that you can support your arguments. So no worries about that. But I tell you what, though, just because we wrapped up about here with the last class that I did earlier this morning, I don't want to get too much into this until next semester or next class. I'm sorry. So we'll kind of pick up on this on Monday, but before I close, does anybody have any questions? And let me just look at the comments here. Yeah, exactly, Justin. So he says that he has a friend that has it and says he's completely fine. I mean, that's one of the things that I'm hearing as well. I mean, like, listen, I trust. I'm guessing, Justin, that you're probably young, like me. I'm, I think that the most people that get this are like 65 and older, and that's where the symptoms come in, or actually 75 and older. And I think that maybe a lot of us have it, we just don't know it, and we have no symptoms. So it's kind of interesting how this whole thing is playing out. But it's exactly Justin, exactly. He says that my friend has it and he says he's completely fine. Yeah, we are both 18. Yeah, so I think that like, listen, I assume that most of us in this class are in decent shape, and even though I'm 41, but I like to think that I'm in good shape. I have a good immune system and so forth. And I think that we're all going to be fine with this. Like I said, a vaccine is coming out really soon. It might not be available for us immediately, but we're going to be in good shape. So so no worries, everybody. I think that, like, I mean, don't feel that the like the whole thing is going to end. I mean, don't be cynical. I would say be positive. And in fact, later this semester, I'm going to show you a video where it, it kind of explains that no worry to be had. I mean, we're going to be in good shape and so forth. So once again, I know that we're almost out of time, but does anybody have any questions before I wrap up here? Okay, great. Well, thanks, Hunter. And like I said, if anybody does have any questions before the weekend, uh, just let me know. And I just want to say thank you guys for attending today. I know that it is kind of difficult times that we're all dealing with, but you guys are doing a really, really great job. And I can also speak, by the way, I can also speak not just for our class, but I can tell you that even just in general, I mean, with UCF, with Seminole, I mean, you guys are doing a really, really great job. And so I really tip my hat to you, because I know that how hard you're working, and I know that you're doing such an amazing job. So keep up the great work. And once again, I love you guys, and I'll see you guys on Wednesday. And have a great weekend.